coming down as quickly as you did. We've heard from UN agencies, we've heard from many sports groups as well. We're moving into another realm now. As you can see, it's written up for you for our panel 3, institutional responses for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals through and in sport by multi-stakeholder initiatives and other actors. And we have a selection of those for you, distinguished in their field. It's simply down to me to hand this over to Emmanuel Bale from the University of Lausanne to take us through our panel 3. Emmanuel, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce this panel. It's a main panel, I will say, and we kill all the diversity because, unfortunately, Caitlin Kraft-Bowman had airplane problems, and she can't join us today, and she's very disappointed for that. So I'm professor at the University of Lausanne in sport management, and at the University of Lausanne we have the chance to build a research network specially dedicated to sport, and we have at this time 120 researchers that are interested in this topic of sport, and all the faculty have researchers in this network. And we try, through this network, to work better with other academic institutions in the Geneva region, with Geneva University and all academic institutions in Canton de Vaud also. And we try also to be in better connection with sport institutions, but also with the question of sport for development. So I will have a special thanks to Estelle Brulart, because Estelle is graduated from our master in sport management, and she helps a lot to gather documents, and she's a great specialist about sport for development, and it was great to work with her, and special thanks for the document you can find on the platform of the day. So I will introduce after our panelists and thank them to be with us. As you can see, the first slide of my presentation shows the 4 main categories of partners involved in multi-stakeholder initiative for achieving development through sport. We have already seen the initiative taken by the Olympic movement and by international public organizations. 2 other types of stakeholders, non-governmental organizations, NGO, and corporations can also have a substantial impact by initiating or supporting projects. Corporations, often, as part of their corporate social responsibility and or marketing policies, can harness the power of sport in a number of ways. Via social sponsorship, which focuses on promoting or raising awareness of a cause, not just on sporting performance. For example, Rivella sponsors Switzerland's Slow Up initiative, which encourages young people and families to do more sport in Switzerland. Sébastien Chapero, our expert in sponsorship, will describe more examples with a critical analysis also. Via sport patronage, involving actions carried out directly by companies or through foundations. Both approaches enable corporations to support causes, whether they are social, humanitarian, or environmental. Examples include Nestlé and the Cleven Fit for Future Foundation, which supports schools which would like to introduce physical activity programs to combat sedentarity. The sum involved are consequent, as an estimated 15% of $65 billion companies spend on sponsorship goes to such projects which are becoming ever bigger. Some new trends, strategies are emerging. For example, bottom-up strategy. It's a concept of a famous American researcher to fight poverty and create new forms of economic development. Perhaps the best-known example is Mohamed Yunus, whose initiative inspire Danone Grameen ladies. In sport industry, maybe you heard from Adidas because Adidas has begun a new bottom-up strategy by selling shoes for $1 in India. New concept and player at the interface between companies and NGOs may also see the light of day, such as social business, social entrepreneurship, and sport. For example, IOVINE is a Swiss sport crowdfunding site that provides sport people with a platform they can use to finance their sporting project. NGOs are rooted in local communities and are becoming increasingly professional. Many sport development projects are set up and implemented by NGOs. In fact, there are around 70,000 NGOs and many millions of voluntary organizations of all sizes and all types around the world that show their big potential. NGOs can be divided into those that specialize in sport development, like, for example, Street Football World, but also those unconnected with sport, but which sometimes make use of sport to help fulfill their mission, like Red Cross, for example, or Handicap International. Sport and Dev platform that Mark will present listed more than 700 sport for development organizations in 2016. The potential for collaboration and partnership is huge and underexploited, especially given that, according to some experts, their presence and their contributions can sometimes exceed those of the United Nations. The last slide of my introduction shows that every step in the process of conceptualizing, implementing, and evaluating projects involves challenges which are emerging from the field or on the literature that our four speakers will debate. Most development programs are created because the people involved want to make a difference. However, some programs are simply exercises in social washing or image building. In addition, the objectives defined by a program designer are not always coherent with local needs. Implementation must be well thought out to ensure the program is compatible with local cultural consideration and economic, geographical, and infrastructure constraints. When it comes to evaluation, many organizations do not have the resources needed to properly evaluate a project impact, and even when they do, their evaluations are often insufficiently objective. In addition, it is difficult to measure long-term social impact. Due to these difficulties, many organizations do not produce anything more than an activity report to show their financial backers. In order to illustrate such multi-stakeholder initiative, we have the pleasure to welcoming four speakers who will share with us their experiences and expertise in the field. So, first of all, I would like to present Sébastien Shapiro. Thank you, Sébastien, to be with us. And Sébastien has founded the agency Sponsorize, and he is the president of the Swiss Sponsorship Think Tank that defends sponsor interest and promotes sponsorship throughout Switzerland and abroad. After, we have Jill Klein. Jill Klein is Secretary General of the World Sports Alliance, intergovernmental organization, whose mission is training programs for sport executives, but also to contribute to a better educational youth program, and also to the construction of sport infrastructures for the youth. Then John Morrison, Director of IHRB, which serves as the Secretariat of the MEGA, Sporting Event Platform for Human Rights. You will present your platform with a coalition of a lot of stakeholders. And I will give the floor to Mark Probst, who is the Director of SAD, Swiss Academy for Development. And SAD mission is to implement program in sport for development, but also to evaluate this program, but also they promote the exchange of knowledge and mutual knowing through a dedicated platform, which is an international platform on sport and development, which is called FORDEP. So thank you very much to take the floor, Mark, and congratulations for this great initiative.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thank you, a warm thank you to the hosts, and welcome back after lunch. SAD, the Swiss Academy for Development, really is an SDP organization. So we are talking now, I'm going to talk about sport development and peace predominantly. And the topic of today's panel is what are possible institutional responses to the SDGs. And I thought I start my short presentation with showing how a small organization, SAD, has been trying to align its activities with the SDGs. It's not the most readable slide, I'm aware of that, but the key message is that for us, given that we have the SDGs now, it's really, really key that the SDGs are put at the center. That's basically the green box that you see in the center. It's about sustainable transformation. We do believe that the SDGs very much focus also on future generations. So that's why, one of the reasons why we work with children and youth. We use a human rights approach. And basically, we think that the SDGs are very much also about individual transformation, about lifestyle changes. So one component is to build skills, values through sport, and enable kids and young people to, come up with these lifestyle changes. We have selected 3 SDGs and sub-objectives: health, education, and employment. And the SDGs for us are an opportunity, finally, to actually measure what we do against objectives. And that's something we have been waiting for quite a while, and now it's there. It's not yet. The how is still a bit in the making, but the framework to measure what organizations such as SAD do is there. For us, sustainable or environmental sustainability is a cross-cutting issue, because we agree without fighting the effects of climate change, no point in having the SDGs, if I exaggerate a little bit. And we also take into consideration that the SDG very much call for national governments, national organizations to contribute to the SDGs, hence the importance of capacity building on the local level, on the regional level, and then also the sharing of lessons in policy fora and seminars like today. I do believe in order to think about institutional responses, it's also useful to have a bit of an idea about the caveats on the current state of affairs in sport development and peace. And there is certainly, there has been a proliferation of organizations, of programs, we all know that, but there is also a lack of sustainable funding. And these points are interlinked, of course. There are fluctuating UN government commitments, there are fluctuating priorities, which is one of the reasons, certainly not the only one, why SDP has not become a cross-cutting issue. Lack of coordination, I think we have heard enough about that this morning, and to some extent SDP has become an industry in terms of there is competition in this field, no secret about that. And also the trends give us indication on how institutional responses could look like. So one trend is, and that's the purpose of the seminar today, is the alignment with the SDGs in terms of finding integrated approaches, more holistic approaches, more comprehensive approaches that take into consideration the different elements of sustainability. I believe that the SDGs have given room to a dialogue about increased policy coherence. We are talking about coherence between sport and integrity and SDP, for example. We have heard this morning there is at least a demand for sector coordination or improved sector coordination. There have been new initiatives. Whether we have achieved coordination is another question. And especially what Philipp from UNESCO talked about, sort of the aspiration that national governments incorporate the SDGs into the national policies. I have already mentioned the funding. I think the changing landscape in terms of actors is quite important. I do believe there is a likelihood that we're going to see a decrease in SDP actors. The UNOSDP has been closed. We have heard that this morning. There is also an emergence of new actors. Sports federations, especially smaller ones, have become more interested in SDP, private sector, and others. Programming and technology, I want to go into detail. I think these are trends that may nevertheless influence how we try to most effectively achieve the SDGs. And I think when thinking about responses, we have to think about 5 levels. How do we respond on an organizational level? What do the SDG mean for our own organization? Is it still the right business model? Is it still the right partners we have? Do we have the right fundraising model? I believe we need to think about program design and implementation, as just mentioned. How do we align our projects with the SDGs? Policy making, mainly about policy coherence, how to make SDP, a mainstream, a cross-cutting topic. And here I feel very strongly about us not only talking to our peers, and that's what we often do. We talk to those that already believe in SDP, and if you want SDP become a mainstream topic, this needs to change. I think, obviously, as mentioned this morning, coordination, cooperation. What coordination mechanisms do we need in the future? And again, this links to the closure of UNSDP. There are voices out there that would say, well, we don't need the UNSDP 2.0 because it hasn't quite lived up to its mandate, coordination hasn't improved, etc. I would strongly disagree, and I think especially also after what we heard this morning, we absolutely need a coordination body that is able to do agenda setting and priority setting on a meta level. There are discussions going on, I believe, and it perhaps doesn't need to be a special advisor, can be a small coordination office in Geneva and on New York, for example, but something, in our view, needs to happen. I'm going to skip this one. There are a range of initiatives, multi-stakeholder initiatives. We have heard about the MINEPS process. The Commonwealth is very active. The platform on mega sporting events and human rights. There are networks on national levels, peace and sport, beyond sport, etc. And Sport and Deaf is also a multi-stakeholder initiative. In my assessment, many of these initiatives are great, but they, by nature, perhaps are not always true multi-stakeholder initiatives. They focus on a certain area, they focus on certain actors. So linking back to the point I just made before, I believe there is a need for a proper multi-stakeholder process on a meta level that basically can and has the potential to bring all sorts of actors into the room. IOs, federations, NGOs, and so forth, and academia, of course. Just finish in a second. Sportanddeaf.org is the result of a multi-stakeholder initiative. It's a result of the first Macklingen conference in 2003. And it's basically the largest impartially led community of practice in the sport development and peace sector. It's predominantly online, but it also has offline activities. It provides information, resources, news, job openings. There is room to publish opinion papers. It's really a place to also set strategic directions. It has been around since 2003, and as Emmanuel said, we have like 9,000 people registered, 800 organizations, and we have 1 million plus hits. And I think to illustrate that it is a multi-stakeholder initiative, so basically we see, as I've said, Sport and Deaf as a community of practice pretty much in the center of discussions. It's led based on the principles of impartiality, inclusivity. It's formed by the community. And Sport and Deaf caters to the needs of most stakeholders, government, researchers, federations, and so forth. And the platform wants to contribute so that sport is used as a tool to actually achieve the SDGs as efficiently as possible. There is much potential or more potential in the platform, but that is what it is today. And we believe there is certainly room to unfold its potential even further in terms of strategy setting, in terms of even a stronger focus on capacity building, on policy setting, and on basically more information, including monitoring and evaluation of the SDGs. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I will give the floor to John Morrison. And John will answer to the question, how are human rights fundamental to sport and mega sporting events?
Sure, thank you very much, Emmanuel. I'm going to stay seated. Those of you who watched the news last night would have seen, I'm British, by the way, so I must apologize for that, first of all. But the reason I say that is our Prime Minister had a very bad speech yesterday. If anybody saw that, she got heckled. Somebody from the audience came up. She had a bad cough. Even the words started falling off the wall. So I'm going to stay seating. Quite happy to be in my chair. Yes, it's exactly the kind of image we want to project to the world at the moment, at the time of transition. I'm going to tell you about the platform on mega sporting events and human rights as an example of multi-stakeholder collaboration around the SDGs. And I'm just going to answer 4 questions, really. I mean, the big question you've asked me, but the why, the who, the what, and the how, to keep it real simple. Why? Why do we need another initiative on sport and anything? I mean, given there's 500 or so already. My organisation, we do other things, but it was at the end of London 2012 that a number of people came knocking on our door. We then did some research in different places, Brazil, Qatar, Russia, China, Japan. And what seemed to be clear is a lack of learning around social impact of these mega sporting events, particularly human rights, but I would argue other types of social impact. One example would be fatality rates. I mean, why do people have to die? London has been the only mega sporting event in recent times where people haven't died in the construction phase. I mean, why did 50 people have to die to deliver the Commonwealth Games in Delhi, for example, in 2010? Why did 9 have to die in Brazil in 2014, etc.? But there are many other, I mean, I won't go into why all the human rights that are involved, but there are many. We also saw cities pulling out of shortlists for mega sporting events in Europe and North America. And I would argue then that the social license of these events was in question, or is in question. And, if these events, if sport is meant to deliver on SDGs, people have to believe that they really have to believe that that's going to happen. So what does human rights offer? Well, I think people say, well, where are human rights in the SDGs? Well, human rights are everywhere and nowhere. They are the ghost in the machine. They are the dignity, the human beings upon which we do this for. And we don't do it unto them. Those humans have to have a say in the process. They have to be participants on the journey. So when we created our platform, and I'll just move on to the second slide in terms of who's in the room, so I'm going to answer all the questions at once, if that's okay. We tried to bring together not just the sports bodies, the sponsors, the governments, of course, all of these are crucial, but those that the affected groups involved. Clearly the athletes and the players, they're human beings. The fans, no one's mentioned fans today. Who pays for all of this? Consumers and fans. Yeah, I mean, they keep just about everybody in this room in a day job, I guess, financially. Don't they have a say in these things? What about the communities upon which we put these events, the journalists, the workers in the supply chains? So human rights is about giving voice to them, restoring the social contract, the social license of these events means recognizing the inherent dignity of all those different human beings involved. And when we had our last big forum in Washington, D.C. last year, it was nice to hear Martina Navratilova give one of the keynotes, not just as an athlete, not just in terms of being an LGBTI athlete, but on behalf of the workers and the journalists and the other stakeholders in the process. It's immensely powerful if we join up those archetypes. So the who, I think on the last slide, is everybody. And if you want to see more about who's involved, I have to apologize that this is an old version, so it doesn't include UEFA, sorry, and the Commonwealth and the Francophonie de Soleil. They are now all members of the platform. This is an old version. But the benefits, the core benefits of the collaboration, I would say, are fourfold. Collective action brings collective leverage. If we want to minimize the risks, and there will always be risks with these events, there is a lot we can do. We have a common framework in the terms of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which set out the role of government and non-state actors. We can collaborate around that framework. Involving affected groups brings trust and legitimacy. We think human rights and these events need to be a public good. We don't want to create costs. Most sports federations in this room have limited budgets. Most African nations, Asian nations do not have money to spend on human rights due diligence. Huge, expensive lawyers. This needs to be integrated, but it also needs to be a public good. It has to be achievable at the global level. And the vision is not just that these events are held in North America and Europe. They need to be held in every corner of the world, but not at any cost. And the level playing field argument, I think, is the fourth. That if we can use these events and their legacies, we can create a better level playing field. I'll finish by just talking a bit about the what and the how. Well, I've just done the what, haven't I? The four core benefits. We want to, the platform as it exists at the moment, wants to create a center on sport and human rights. It's going to take a generation to fully integrate human rights into the life cycle of mega sporting events, but we think it's possible. All those different actors that were on that previous slide, from the bidding round to the hosting round to the legacy round, making human rights a pre-competitive issue in the world of sports. And to do that, the platform will, hopefully next year, establish some kind of center on sport and human rights somewhere in the world. We are very happy that 4 of the sports bodies have already made policy commitments on human rights. IOC, FIFA, Commonwealth, and UEFA. We encourage every sports body in the room to make a policy commitment on human rights. But the next step is obviously to move from commitment to action. And I think there's a lot of space in this room and in future events to share the how you do it. The due diligence, the prevention, the remedy. This is not rocket science. It can be done. And I call on all of us to work collectively. And so there is an open invitation to everybody in this room to join us on the 30th of November at the next big forum hosted by the government of Switzerland. Thomas Bach, Prince Zayed of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, my chair, Mary Robinson, and others will be amongst the keynote speakers. We will at that point announce to the world our intention to keep working together and to deepen the collaboration in future years. If you'd like to come to that event, please give me or my colleague Guido, the good-looking guy there holding the platform, your business card, and we'll make sure that you get it. It's a closed event, so we'll make sure you get invited if you'd like to be involved. But thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, to share with us the perspective of this platform. And to share the future also in the perspective, which is very interesting for the sport actor. So I will give the floor to Gilles Klein, who is General Secretary of World Sport Alliance, which is a very original initiative and very pertinent one. So, and I think, before to starting with the SDGs, I think Gilles want to make some conclusion about the Millennium Development Goals in the sport sector. So, please, Gilles, if you want to take the floor, I will just switch. Okay. Yeah.
Third position, following the lunch. It's a challenge, you know. Anyway, from my experience as physical education teacher and coach in athletics, I kept in mind, in sport, everything starts on the fields for education, health issues, gender equality, and social inclusion. all start on the fields. From my experience as policy developer for governmental organization or intergovernmental organization, I kept in mind the problem is not the gap between promise and reality, the gap between declaration and action plan. The problem is how do we together fill in the gap with concrete tools, with concrete mechanisms. I represent here an intergovernmental organization comprised of 33 member states, mainly in the South Global, mainly in Africa, and we were entrusted by the nebula of the international civil society, and the civil society asked us, how do you able to accelerate the process of MDGs dissemination in Africa, for example? And at this moment, I responded, if we think about universality, you have two kinds of universality. First, the universality of the MDGs voted by the head of state at the United Nations. But you have also the universality of local communities and shared values on the fields. If we forget to agree the two kinds of situation, global and local, then we are not able to achieve our challenge. And then, first step, our action during the MDG era.
L'autre. Green.
Green, okay.
Encore.
Encore.
Non, c'est bon.
Non,
C'est bon. Ouais, ok.
Some organizations decided, related to the MDGs in the sports sector, to address all the MDGs, or to choose some MDGs. Personally, in our organization, we decided to articulate the MDGs. I explain. If we follow the successive MINEPS summit, the need for an action plan. The major question in physical education, physical activity and sport is the inequalities issues. Inequalities between countries, inequalities in a country. And then for us, entrusted to educate young people and train their staff to MDGs through sport, it was important to develop some programs. We edited some books, some collection, and so on, explaining how on the fields the teachers, the coaches are able to introduce the pupils to the MDGs, health, education, and so on. But secondly, if you want to be efficient, notably in Africa, you need to address the question of infrastructures, sport infrastructures. If we don't build any infrastructure, you know, I don't know if you know very well the African context, but when you visit some colleges or high schools of National Institute of Sport, they don't have anything to teach sport and so on. And then we decided to develop a policy based on the PPPs. It means if you want to achieve education, gender equality, and so on, you need to promote economic development of the country. And we negotiated and concluded some public-private partnership with the head of states and government. For example, to PPPs in the area of agriculture, water sanitation, and so on, electrification. Africa without electrification is not a sustainable development in Africa. If you want to develop sport, you have first to address the question of economic sustainable development. Then we sign PPPs in order to develop our program and build sport infrastructure. Assessment. The president of Burundi in 2012 signed all the agreement and asked to the Minister of Finance to inscribe our project on the budget 2013. Immediately, the director of the IMF, International Monetary Funds, called to the president and said, "You are under adjustment structural program. You are not able to sign this kind of agreement. If you signed, I cancel every contribution for the IMF to the country." Then it's very complex, you know. If you want to develop sport in developing country, you need absolutely to promote economic development, but the countries in Africa are not free, are not autonomous. They are dependent on the northern institution. And one economist, one friend, the famous economist, said, you know, the only one solution is to develop subsoil, underground, natural resources, able to generate money. At this moment, you are able to develop some program for education, health, and sport, benefiting to the well-being of populations. Then we change our attitude for the SD. No, sorry.
Revenir en arrière.
Elle était oubliée. Sorry. We change our attitude, you know. For the SDG era, we need absolutely succeed if you want to save the planet. But when you look to the World Bank report, for example, the SDG number 15, the World Bank say, we are able to mobilize for 6 years under only $100 billion. To achieve this objective 15, we need $1,000 billion per year until 2030. Then we need absolutely for sport or for other SDGs to ask to the private sector to be more involved in the support. For that reason, we will continue to develop our PPPs, but we will also negotiate in the framework of CSR or sponsorism, the contribution to government, to enterprises and companies, to good governance. It's a minimum. It means our environmental, social, and good governance policies, including SDP. And to do that and to conclude, we signed in July a partnership, an agreement with the United Nations Global Sustainable Index Institute. This institute, presented in Davos 1 year ago, decided to evaluate, to measure, and to assess the contribution of the major companies in the world, of the major companies of the North, mainly, and South, to the ESG policies, and ask us to include the SDP sector. And then we are able now to evaluate the contribution of government and companies, not in terms of communication, declaration, but in terms of financial decision on financial annual reports. And I think we have to create tools, and we are on the way to create a global investment fund for youth sport, and then to create, for example, bank and other tools in order to raise money for SDGs, and SDP programs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gilles, to show that we need to create economic and political conditions to do a better sport development program, or to implement, and it's a real initial condition. And to make the bridge also with the last but not least presentation of Sebastian, because Sebastian will present more focus on social sponsorship, but as Gilles has said, there is several initiatives and possibilities for companies and corporations to support development through sport program. So please, Sebastian, you want to show 2 cases and maybe to have a critical point of view on these 2 cases on social sponsorship.
Thank you, Emmanuel. If you allow me to stand up for this speech. When first Emmanuel called me about SDGs, SDPs, I was saying, what the hell are you talking about? We're from the private sector, and we don't know what's going on with the UN. With actually all those projects, we have to bridge together. We have to work together on what you were saying, on economical and on return on investment projects. So when I first prepared this short talk, I was like searching for something that back to the ground, back to the field, would be helpful for you guys in order to see how the private sector and the public sector can work together. So we have just, and I have only 5 minutes, we have just 2 examples. The one is with Hublot. We're in Switzerland. We actually work in the Swiss sponsorship think tank. We work with all the major brands in Switzerland in order to gather people on sponsorship projects and CSR projects. And I just have one question for the audience. Why do you think Hublot would invest in CSR today? What are the 2 or 3 main goals for Hublot when the CEO decided to invest in CSR programs? Brand awareness, perfect. You're 100% right. What else? Return on investment. You guys did well. They are actually looking for acquiring new clients and work on clients' loyalty. That's the bottom line. We work on building communities, and with these communities, with this kind of data, Hublot can sell his watches. That's basically it. So, in this example, which is a small example on how we can work on values, how we can create value for a private firm and also for a public project. This project is for UNICEF. We can actually bring together what are Hublot values and projects and goals and what UNICEF is looking for. UNICEF is looking for raising funds. This is one example on how the private sector can help the public sector to raise money. The other one is Red Bull. Red Bull made a platform. It's an own platform where Red Bull raised money for a good cause. This is the cause. And again, why Red Bull is doing that? They do that for their values. They do that for the image. That's right. But at the end of the day, when we gather with CMOs and CEOs, they're always looking on how we can get return, how we can leverage, and how we can acquire new clients and work on clients' loyalty. So if the public sectors brings tools, projects, platforms, institutions to better help those private institutions, enterprise company, to reach their own goals, we're getting to the point. We'll reach the goals of the public sector and the goals of the private one. But yes, you're going to tell me, how can we do that? Is it possible? Is it not the opposite? from our own experience, we can do that. We can do that on a field level and work on actually tangible KPIs, so the public sector can win and the private sector can win also. Emmanuel, I'm the last one. I wanted to be quick, but I'm open to any question. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. I think we have the time to take maybe a 5 or 10 minutes questions. So it's up to you to take the floor, please. If you have a question for our 4 panelists. Maybe, yes? Yes, yes. From UNICEF? Yeah. Yes, perspective, yes.
Again, I'm Valerio from UNICEF. Thanks so much for the presentation. I have a question perhaps for everyone.
Maybe just with the microphone. Thank you.
Does it work? Yeah. Valerio from UNICEF, once again, thanks so much. A question for everyone, and perhaps starting with our colleague from the Sport and Dev platform. There's a lot of, it felt from the presentation, a lot of fear, if you like, about the industry shrinking or the sport for development and sport development actors reducing themselves and emerging new actors. And I was wondering whether that is it really a challenge or is it not? Is it that we could perhaps think about not even defining ourselves as an industry anymore, and perhaps one of the challenges that those past years from 2003 up to now have brought about is this kind of insular approach that we gave to the use of sport as a tool for development as compared to any other potentially competing strategy. So I wanted to propose that we call ourselves the SDG industry now, because in fact we are all in this together now, and of course what brings us together is the belief in sport, but there shouldn't be more this distinction on who is who and what do they work and whether they come from within sport or from outside. So that's more a personal opinion rather than a question, but I wanted to give that challenge to you and see what do you think and whether you feel that is even a possible trend for the future. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. Great question. I don't think, or I didn't intend to portray it as a fear. I'm saying it's a trend. And I think there is a lot of debate about collaborative modes and how SDP organizations can work together with IOs, etc. In reality, I haven't seen that many successful examples. And I'm talking about the grassroots level. Huh? I'm not talking about UNICEF partnering with anyone else. What we see, though, is that many SDP NGOs, they change their business model. They change the business model because they don't succeed in securing enough funding. They basically become a social enterprise, or they set up an NGO and a social enterprise. And that's clearly an indication that there is an issue regarding funding. This can be good or bad. Maybe it's not a bad thing if there are less SDP actors. And the second remark, in terms of distinction, yes and no. Because yes, in principle, yes, we should be working together, and it's about sport contributing to the SDGs. No, because it's different approaches and it's different expertise required. And I think we are not yet quite there to say we all believe in sport, let's work together to achieve the SDGs.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, another question there?
Dawn Goodwin from United Purpose. It's really interesting, and I think that multi-stakeholder approach is massively the way forward. And just to pick up on Valerio's comment, I think there's also an issue on integration, because we all believe that sport can have a huge development impact, but we're not at a point where that's happening yet. So there needs to be something in that interim that helps sport become completely mainstreamed within development. So I think there's something needed in the middle. And I guess that's my question to the panel is, definitely there's so many, your introduction was great about all the different actors in civil society and corporates and government and UN. And my question is, I guess, what's the platform now? What do we do around coordinating that? Because there's some great stuff going on in different bits and different bilateral and multilateral conversations happening, but it doesn't feel like we're really going to optimise the contribution of sport to the SDGs until we bring some of that together at a top line a bit better and look at how that filters down in terms of measuring our impact, in terms of sharing good practice, in terms of being clear on what it is that we're just joining some of that up. Otherwise, it feels like we could all do great stuff and it never really pulls together. So I guess that's a question particularly in light of the closure of the UNOSDP as well. Kind of what do we think the future is in terms of that coordination of multi-stakeholder activity?
John and Gilles, maybe together you can.
I mean, my answer is not to quite answer that question, although I don't, not being an expert in the world of sport, but being an expert in some other worlds, like migration, I spent 10 years of my life working on that, or refugee protection or whatever, there are 1,000 reasons why global coordination doesn't happen. And I think most people in this room could probably write them down on a bit of paper. So we can't wave a magic wand and hope it's going to happen, but clearly, I mean, the Mark will attempt to answer your question. But I want to just put a big challenge right in the room to all of you, that before we try and reorganize the world, what about the sports industry itself? There's an inherent responsibility in this industry in terms of the impacts it has over human beings, which having worked in many other industries, coming to know your industry, this industry is rather reluctant to pick up the responsibility side. And I think before we talk about realizing SDGs, as well as that, there is this first step of understanding this industry, the sponsors, the broadcasters, the sports bodies, the fans, the athletes, the workers, have a collective responsibility for their collective impacts. And until people work together around addressing that, I would not vote for my city to host a mega sporting event. I would vote like the people of Boston or Hamburg or Rome or Oslo. I would wonder, what is the benefit? Even now when I visit East London, I still wonder what the benefit of London holding Olympics. I think there's some benefit. But until we address this issue of sport and the responsibility of sport as an industry, I think sport has a limited license to operate within the SDGs, I would say. I'd be provocative. Because until you understand the harm you yourselves cause and can manage and mitigate that harm, what right do you have to work with NGOs or governments or whatever to realize SDGs? And you might say, well, my sport has no impact. It's only upside. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. There's not a business on this planet that doesn't have a negative impact. Until you understand that and you mitigate it, you don't have social license to operate within the SDGs, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Gilles?
Just three things. First, I refer to my text on the website. I developed my position in an article, very developed and detailed. Secondly, when you compare the business of industry of sport, $800 billion per year, with the number achieve education until 2030, 37 billion. The challenge is there, you know. We have, to my opinion, 4 challenges for the future in the SDP sector, but also for the global SDGs. First, the challenge is not to increase the number of organizations in the SDP sector, but to organize a better coordination. Better coordination at the UN headquarters, for example, or the leaders of the organization. The second challenge is to organize a coordination also for fundraising in order to ask to the sport industry, but also to other industry. For example, we have a partner in United States of America in the area of renewable energies. He said, okay, we signed many contracts for renewable energy. We will give money for the SDP sector. The third challenge is to better increase the measurement and evaluation. And the index will be fundamental. Not measure the progress realized by the government, No, no. To measure the progress for the SDGs by the government and the companies. It's not possible for any company in the world to say, oh, sorry, we don't have a good governance, but we develop some action for SDGs. No, sorry. Sorry, it's not sufficient now. We need a result at the bottom of the financial annual report, how your company is really involved for the SDG achievement, including the SDP sector. And the fourth challenge then, if coordination institution, finance and measure are three essential challenges. For me, we need to organize together here. I don't know how to organize the governance of the SDP sector. Maybe to start with a board of the main organization to think about how we are able to organize this kind of coordination, institution, finance, evaluation. But the time has come to put together the energy, the powers, and define the future until 2030.
Thanks, Gilles. You already do the take-home message, I will say, from our panel.
Sorry.
Thanks to do the job, but we will take maybe two last questions. One, please, Madam, yes.
My name is Leila De Souza, and I'm working right now in Tokyo on a legacy education program for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and Paralympic Games. My question is a little bit about gender equality. There was somebody who was going to actually talk about SDG number 5 today, but she didn't come. So I think it's good to keep the subject on the table. There is SDG number 5 now as a standalone, gender equality as a standalone SDG. But I see gender equality, I mean, it's like human rights, why are we still talking about it? I see it in every single SDG, that there is no way that we can promote any of the SDGs if we don't gender mainstream somehow. Can somebody say something about that? And also maybe the sport world, from the sport world IOC, in your sustainability strategies, how do you do gender mainstreaming in every SDG? Because I see that is something that has to be done.
Okay. It was more a question for Caitlin, but unfortunately she's not here, so maybe John?
Yeah, I mean, I want to take gender in both perspectives, actually. So, I mean, an all-male panel answering a question on gender. I mean, I don't think we have the social license to answer your question, but absolutely, both on and off the track. I mean, you know, for me, gender is about who makes the sportswear. You know, who's sitting in the factory in Bangladesh, making the shirts, making the shoes, making the emblems, making the pins. It's about who, you know, in the context of Iran or Saudi Arabia, it's about women being able to watch sport or participate in sport. You know, gender equality in sport has a long way to go. I mean, luckily, FIBA ruled this year that Bilqis, the athlete from the US, could wear the hijab when performing basketball. Why is it that basketball had one rule on hijab wearing and FIFA and other sports bodies had another rule? Why isn't there even basic, you know, unanimity between sports bodies on simple issues of discrimination, I would say? The other issue of gender, the LGBTI piece, which we haven't spoken about enough today, sport is hugely genderized by definition. We won't even have time today to talk about the issue of gender in sport, in the participation of sport. But there's a huge tsunami coming on that one, and it's a shame that we haven't had a chance to talk about that today.
Yes, with Kathleen, yes. Maybe a last question, if we may? Yes.
Federico Aliaki, FIFA. I think that John loves to tease me with that social license
I just love teasing
debate.
you.
So every time he sees me in the audience, he provokes a reaction from me. So I'm pleased to please you with my comments on that. I think that I completely disagree with you on that. I believe that if any organization having a negative impact on our society doesn't have a license to operate, and no one on our planet has a license to operate or social license to exist, because the fact that the sports world and the sports industry, as you define it, has a negative impact through our activities on certain matters, and in particular with through the mega sporting events, doesn't mean that the sport in itself cannot have a positive contribution to achieving some of the sustainable development goals, or all of them. I think that I'm definitely part of that industry, as a former athlete, as a fan, as working for a sports organization, and therefore that's a reason why I feel compelled to defend the world of sports, because irrespective of that understanding of how much of the social license has been lost and how much responsibility we as sports organizations have to regain the trust, I'm not saying the social license, but the trust of the public that we're doing a good job, or we're addressing the issues that are related to our operations. I think that sports has, and we all have at least some sort of an understanding that it has some sort of positive impact on our society that needs to be understood in first place. And that's why I believe that there's a reason for a conference like the one we're having here today, to really discuss why it is that, or how can sports contribute to the SDGs. If we wouldn't have a license, I don't think that the UN or the government of Switzerland or the canton of or Geneva would have invited the world of sports to have this discussion. So I fundamentally disagree with you on that. I think that one of the questions that I wanted to have, but unfortunately we didn't have the time for the previous panel, I would like to ask here, and I would like to ask for the rest of the discussion today, is to think of why are we still talking about not having measurements of impact of sports onto the then MDGs and today the SDGs. I feel really frustrated, and I feel as well myself part of the failure of this whole movement when we're still asking the same question we asked in Macklingen in 2003. It's been 14 years of talking about what is the impact of sports on development and peace. And we still are asking the same question. So my question for the previous panel, for the UN system, and for everyone involved in this sector, is to analyze what are the reasons for that failure so that we do not repeat them again. It cannot be that we're still talking about funding is necessary, but we cannot sell it because we don't know actually how much impact or how much positive impact sports can have. And therefore, as long as we don't have an answer to that question, we don't understand what have been the challenges that blocked us from having an answer today after 14 years, then we will probably commit the same mistake and be discussing in 2030 why or what is the impact of sports on the SDGs.
Can I just reply very quickly?
Yes, just to make a response as an academic, if I can, there is some progress in the academic also methodology to evaluate, I will say, outcome or impact of activities for non-profit organizations in general. For example, if you see a social return on investment, it's a good tool also to do, and some of sport organizations are using these tools. There is also social balance sheet, and there is more and more, I will say, tools, even if they are critical, which can help sport organization or sport for development organization to have another way to evaluate their results.
But the tools are there, but who is interested in getting the results and who's funding that operation?
Yes. Yes, you're right, but I think as innovative and powerful organization, you have to push this kind of tool, and you have to promote this tool also, I think, if I may.
Yes, but the role of the sports, the world of sports and sports organizations is to develop sports. If that is contributing, and we believe it is, contributing to the SDGs, then and the United Nations and some the corporate sector as well is interested in understanding that, then there needs to be an investment into analyzing that, because otherwise we will never know. And the tools might be there, but no one is using them because they cost money, and it's a big effort to analyze it. And therefore, I know it is difficult. It's difficult to go beyond the quantitative assessment of our programs, of the SDP programs that we support as well. But there needs to be an investment in that. We have had recently, and ironically in Kazan, a meeting this June with the UN, with UN organizations and civil society organizations who belong to the Sports for Development and Peace sector movement. And there the outcome was that there's an agreement that there is a need for understanding that impact. And this is a clear request from civil society organizations to the UN system, to put in place those tools in order for us to be able to assess that impact. Yes. And this is a clear request, if I may make it to the UN sector right now, but it's something we need to discuss very clearly, because it's there where the UN can play an important fundamental role in achieving that.
Okay, thank you, Federico. Last answer from John.
Yes. It's Federico, if we keep arguing like this, it's going to become an Olympic sport at some point. I think you know that I didn't mean what you just said there, because the sport has a huge amount to offer to SDGs. It's a legitimate conversation. That's why we're here today. It's a huge upside. All I'm asking is that sport, like FIFA is already doing now, understands its risk, identifies its social risk, and manages it and mitigates it as best it can, as would any other business. That's the request. And FIFA's doing it, IOC is moving on that road, other sports bodies are beginning to. That's my request, is to reach the upside, we also have to understand how we mitigate our risk. To pretend there is no social risk would be the problem.
Thank you, John. And I think we will close our debate, and I would like to thank a lot our 4 experts, and it was a pleasure to work with you, and thank you so much.
Emmanuel, thank you very much indeed for that. I think as the day draws on, it's clearer that the challenges are there, and you are elucidating many of them as we go. We're going to take a break now. Can I just ask, could you please just listen for a moment? All those panelists and facilitators for the next 2 sessions, please to gather at the back in 15 minutes' time, because we will make